This is Lysha Holmes, and I'm your host on the Recruiters Recruitment Podcast, brought to you by Hoxo Media. And I'm really thrilled and excited to welcome to our channel today someone that I've known for a very, very long time. I dread to think how long, actually. This is Richard Gahagan, who is the founder and CEO of We Are Adam Recruitment. Welcome to you today. How are you, Richard?
I'm very well, thank you, Lysha. Yeah, thank you very much likewise for having me on. I've watched it from afar and I'm very, very impressed. So
thank you.
I'm delighted to be here.
Well, I dread to think when that first night was when I met you and Leon, when you were in your previous company of Michael Page and I was at Fee Farrow Jones. We were at an awards ceremony and I think it was a very drunken affair. It was probably about 20 years ago. Scary.
At least it's got to be. Yeah, got to be. Wow.
Pre-children and setting up our own businesses. So I've obviously admired greatly what you've done with your brand, and just even the name of the company. I always thought it just made you always stand out as something very different. But I think what's really remarkable over the last 12 months is what you've done in terms of your the Future of Work series. So I want to give us an overview of the business We Are Adam, and then talk to us about that specifically and what you've achieved for your market.
Absolutely, yeah. So certainly as a business, we're 14 years old. We launched primarily, as you say, my previous employer was a great business for marketing, sales. That's what we kind of came from. But there's a real pull factor. I've always wanted to run my own business. So we launched Adam. And the kind of catchphrase, we were a very small, different business. It was get to know us from Adam. Very, very personable. And all our candidates and clients do literally do that. And we live by that mantra. But when we hit COVID and sort of a year ago, we looked at basically how is everybody and how are candidates, how are clients, what are all the problems that people are going through? And we thought we can just sort of talk about it informally, or we can actually try and bring some value back to everybody, particularly because we're going to be quiet. We could just see that, work had kind of dropped off a cliff a little bit. So we just started to research what was travel, what was commute like, and what were offices, how were they affected? And the idea was really just to start a piece off to say, how well have we adapted, share things that some of our clients had done, so other people who may be struggling to adapt could see that. And it just kind of blossomed and mushroomed from there, really. So it's been fascinating because we've kind of been in the middle of it. So we've seen all the kind of troubles people have gone through. We've seen some great success stories. And probably the first thing was how fast everybody reacted. Unbelievable in terms of just adapting tech, businesses, all that sort of stuff. Because I did expect every business to stop hiring for a while just to get used to remote working. It just seems a logical thing. And nobody did, really. No. Or some did, but by and large, people just cracked on, which is amazing.
I was going to say, it's almost like a polarization, wasn't it? Of those that froze, that just locked everything down, and those that thought, right, then now's our chance to adapt. Were you finding that? I mean, were your clients in your sectors resistant to remote working and using technology, or were they already on that trajectory, do you think?
I think certainly digital businesses, service-based businesses seem to adapt really quick. They had the tech. Most people had already gone into the cloud, and I think that's the biggest challenge for most people. And then the kind of quick move to working from home, it was kind of forced on us. And I think everybody I know who owns a business said it's actually the best way to make it happen was just actually we didn't have any choice. Yeah, and it's quite a good lesson for other projects is actually that does make things happen really quickly. If you just say we don't have any choice, just crack on. However, there were loads of examples where I've got great businesses who are big manufacturing companies, multi-site. A lot of their staff actually can't work from home. They are literally in the factory, and therefore their management has to be based there. And therefore, a lot of the actual sort of, if you like, stuff that could be done from home wasn't. So they probably took longer. And then I heard stories of like law firms and people we work with who I think arguably they could have done it quicker, but through various kind of processes, they were just nervous to adapt to that. But yeah, by and large, absolutely amazing.
And that's the great thing. And that, apart from the fact that we've known each other as long as we have, and, I admire you greatly personally and professionally from afar, literally at the moment. I think you are in a similar way that we recruit across all recruitment sectors. You do recruit across a number of different industries. So your perspective within the Future of Work series is quite remarkable. It's quite a privileged position to be in. And you talk about, specific success stories. And I'm always, for our audience, about sharing those success stories because it's about creating a best practice, I suppose, like a blueprint of what does that look like. So for our audience, which is, recruitment leaders and aspiring recruitment leaders, so people, still doing the desk job, so to speak, what, if you could sort of pinpoint some of the key successes from that, what do you think they should be thinking about now as we sort of adapt to coming back to maybe a blended working environment, because we're looking at coming out of lockdown now?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is that people obviously adapted to be able to hire online. And I think that's obviously a phenomenal skill set to quickly overnight trust people enough that you never meet them, you get from hiring, attracting to onboarding. And I think that in its first phase was excellent to see that happen. But I think the next phase to come out of it will be, you can already see people use it as competitive advantage. In other words, there are people who reluctantly work remotely and their culture is diminishing, and actually they've still got a lot of work to do, whether they like it or not. And as you say, hybrid working is really tricky. I think hybrid working's got a challenge because you've got the people in the office who want to call a meeting and the people who are working remotely. Suddenly it can't become two different businesses. So all of that kind of blended management is probably one of the biggest areas that I think will be a challenge in 2021 and 22. So you'll see competitors start to poach people because they've chosen to go remote, and those people don't want to be. It's happened to us personally. We've had some honest conversation with people that is the way we're going, and it's not going to come back anytime soon. So there's a lot of positives there, but I think that's where the challenge will be. And then managing things on top of that were already there. And you mentioned earlier, diversity, inclusion, whether you're talking about the culture, everybody's talked for the last 5 years about how do you build a culture, ball pits, pool tables, all this sort of stuff. Well, obviously, none of that really matters, let's be honest, and we all knew that. But really kind of getting people's buy-in, getting communications right. So internal communication, asynchronous communication. So does a meeting really need to be a meeting? Could it be just a broadcast or a video or something like that? And then when it really does need to be a meeting, how do you make sure that there aren't 5 people in the office dominating the conversation when there's one person working remotely and that sort of stuff? So I've seen that secondhand with clients that we've got where that's obviously going on. And then it's really looking at who's actually performing. So the actual attrition factors of, it's all well and good saying we adapted well to COVID, but what's the next world going to look like? And actually, if you've lost your culture and you do lose the best people, not the people perhaps you're okay to lose, then I think you're in a tricky situation where you might have to overhaul your culture completely. In the next year or two, I think there'll be a lot of that.
We're already seeing that. We're already seeing that in the reason that people are coming to talk to us who are still employed and know that they were fortunate to keep their jobs. Maybe they were furloughed at some point in 2020. There's a disconnect on culture because, how can you create a culture that's virtual, especially with the onboarding process? I agree with you totally. I think it's a leap in a faith. You can have all the science and the psychometrics behind it. But it's balancing that out, isn't it? With, this is what people had to do to adapt. But going forward, I think everything that you've said there as an observation is already happening, certainly within our markets. So it's interesting that it's then happening across your different sectors. And one of the things that I love about your story is that if I think back to that video you did a few years ago, the black and white one, where it was basically taking the absolute rip out of corporate world, and you've done that from the start. And I think that it was a very fresh approach. You were probably one of the first recruitment companies to say, you were doing flexible working years ago. You had working parents, you had to, for you, it was more about, I've partnered you for a very long time. So I think that's where you can sort of see the broader picture rather than it just being a sort of reaction to COVID. This is as a strategy going forward. You need to make sure you've got something robust in place. And I think hybrid to me is a positive word. Hybrid implies it's this unicorn and it's this incredible blend of things, but actually it can be quite a stressful person to manage. You're a leader, I'm a leader, and at the moment trying to manage people remotely and keeping motivation and making sure the values are being matched and the clients and customers are satisfied, it's really daunting for leaders going forward. That if this is how it's going to be, I think it's much harder to manage a business remotely than it is when you're in an office with people.
Well, I know a lot of people say 100% remote I think is quite manageable. I think you've got lots of systems in place, you can do that. And 100% office based is okay. Like you say, hybrid is always a positive, but in this particular one, it's still a positive, but it's the hardest one of the lot, I think, to manage that well. And also, if you're a business which relies on hiring a lot of grads or a lot of inexperienced people, how do you get that incidental learning? How do you get, apprentices on, things that we've done ourselves, where we've hired people that valued, the training they've received. That just, it's going to be so hard to manage in a hybrid environment. I just don't know how that will work.
We learn through osmosis, don't we? We're human beings, and ultimately you learn behaviours. I've been doing recruitment as long as you've been doing recruitment. I still learn by the things that I hear and the things that I've seen, and I want to be around other people. So I think, interestingly, we should have this conversation in the middle of 2022 and just see what actually happened. Because I think it will, some will want to work some of the week remotely, I predict that we will go back as a sector, recruitment anyway, to mainly being in the office, even if it's for, the bulk of the week, because that's where you get your energy, it's where you get your productivity. And like you say, bringing through, for succession planning, how on earth are you meant to bring through newbies if they're going to be remote all the time? So I think it's interesting. And you've also got this amazing perspective, having an HR practice with obviously Vanessa running it, your co-director and business partner and wife, and you are the original couplepreneur. So we talked very briefly there about diversity and inclusion. So from an HR perspective, from what you've seen across your industry and your clients, what's going to be important for recruitment leaders to think about in terms of HR and looking after their employees and their team members?
Well, you're very right to say diversity inclusion, but I think it's wider than that. I think it's engagement across the piece, both externally for the people you're hiring and onboarding, but obviously the people you already have. So in a business that will have probably transformed anyway over the last year or two, you're back to very strong internal communications, very strong look at the leadership team. So we're doing quite a lot of leadership team hiring, very senior roles, which is because the business needs have totally changed. So of course, the MD might have changed, therefore the HR team might be working through the whole transformation. So it's all the kind of, I don't think the issues have necessarily changed. I just think the way they need to be managed, the pace they need to be managed to make sure they achieve their business goals, has probably put HR, for the first time for me anyway, as a very strategic role at the top of a board table. Whereas I think if you spoke to most HR directors 5 years ago, no matter how strong that individual was, there was always a feeling of justifying their position and perhaps having to justify their place on the board. I think that's probably the biggest change for an HRD that I've seen in the last couple of years. But I don't think there'll be any surprises to what their sort of day-to-day challenges are. I think it is, it's transformational issues. It's making sure that they're on point. As you say, diversity, inclusion. The biggest question I've been asked, and I don't think it's related to COVID, but in the last 12 months, is how do we proactively change our hiring strategy to ensure that diversity and inclusion is actually put right at the forefront. In other words, people who are trying to put in a proactive recruitment process for the first time rather than make it just part of their overall HR strategy. So that's interesting. And as a result of that, I've seen several consultancies pop up who we work with, who actually that's all they do: diversity, inclusion, monitoring, culture monitoring, private lines for people to be able to access, to give feedback about how they're being managed, and confidential data analysis about the interviewers and how they manage that process.
Very good. So, it's brilliant, isn't it? You wouldn't have predicted that. And what about mental well-being as well? Because that's obviously something that you and I are offline, in terms of the fresh walks, looking after yourself, food, being mindful that we've all gone through a very stressful, very, very stressful time, and we're not through that yet. So where do you think that sits within HR and in hiring?
Well, I just said that was top of the agenda a couple of years ago, well-being, but I think in terms of how it can be implemented, we've probably been given more open goals as to how that can be done quickly now. I think there was still an element, and you use fresh walks, so I'll stick with that as an example. It's something I love, hiking, getting out in the fresh air. I'd mix with people of all levels, all ages, who go on the walks. And one thing I always heard, which I always felt was a bit sad, was, well, that's probably the only one who'll go on this year, because really I can't justify that time out of the office. My boss will probably frown on it unless I can bring return on investment. And you sort of think, it's not really about return on investment, it's about well-being. And yet I get the fact that having been an employee, you can't always just swan out of the office when you want and say, I'll make up the time, as you and I sort of thing, because we know we will do. But now I don't think that matters. Most people have got at least an hour or two a day back off the commute. They can use it how they want. And I do genuinely think most people that are decent who run a business now do get the fact that mental well-being, physical well-being is a huge issue, particularly as people work from home, and they're probably have to manage more issues on top of that, and home parenting and
we're going to come on to that. It's no longer stigmatized, is it? And I think we're both from sort of the old school, and I've just done the sort of inverted commas in the fact that it was probably frowned upon if you admitted you had any stress or anxiety, whereas it's I do agree with what you're saying. I think that what do you mean you're going on a walk for 3 hours in the middle of the day? Well, hang on a second, I was up at 7 in the morning and I'll be back on at 7 at night, so does it really matter? So I think that's what, for me, a positive thing that's shifted over the last year, that people have probably worked around the clock, which is also detrimental, of course, to their mental well-being.
Well, I've joked that I'm not going to say which company or which person, that's for sure. But at one point in my career, I've worked with a boss who was actually very amusing to work with, and I enjoyed their company. But there was one point where they would literally prod their team every day because they felt it was too relaxed, too happy, and they wanted to make sure there was enough levels of stress in that team. Right. So I joked with my team and said that I've worked in that environment and didn't mind it actually.
No, what are you doing talking about Coronation Street or whatever you're watching? Like, get on the phone. So yeah, I think when you've worked in that, but you know, our stress levels have definitely gone on a different place. And speaking of which, homeschooling. So you are a couplepreneur, yourself and Vanessa, and you've obviously got daughters very similar age to mine. As we record this, we're still homeschooling, but of course, when this comes out as a live broadcast, I'm hoping they'll have been back in school a while. Let's hope so anyway. But how have you? It's really important because, you know, it's the first time it's ever happened where we're all in the same boat with it. But how have you managed, you as parents, to still manage a business, and then the people that you've got working for you that have had to juggle it? How have you coped with that?
It's funny you should say that, because at times I've felt it's been really enjoyable, and that actually it's really brought the family together. So I feel a bit of a fraud saying it was really difficult. And then more recently, when you'd have thought we've got used to it, it's actually been the hardest of the lot. So I look at it and think, well, firstly, we're blessed on where we live, the environment, the setting, and I don't just mean where I personally live, but in England, I think we've got a great setting that we sometimes forget. But yeah, balancing it is very, very odd, and I think it's probably feeling sorry for the children more than ourselves. So the first one, we just let them get away with it. And I don't know whether this won't be shown to their school teachers, but the kind of provision of education was so poor that we just thought, you know what, this is going to create too much stress. It's nice weather, just as long as you do exercise, cooking, whatever you want to do, but you just can't sit on your phone all day. And then it's probably been taken more and more seriously. So, but yeah, I think I look at people who work for me, and I look at people who we deal with as clients and candidates, and I really feel sorry for some people. I know some people have got a 2-hour commute still. Yeah, they've got kids the same age as you and I, but they've got a 2-hour commute start at the end of the day, and they're having to split that as a couple, and one's working from home sort of, but having to go in the office now and again. And so there's people in far worse situations, single parents in the centre of Manchester, in a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom flat sort of thing, no garden. So those are the people that really, the government hopefully will look after, that need real provision post this. It's not really the likes, I dare say it, probably of you and I. I think it's people who need to be properly looked after. The tech was we were fortunate if we had a load of excess laptops, so we gave that to a charity.
Amazing.
The thought of a child who can't actually work because they haven't got a computer, it's just, it's 2021. What are we doing? So
I know, I agree with you totally there. I mean, I bring my daughter that there's always going to be people worse off than you. And you're very privileged and you're very lucky. So no, it's really good to hear that. And none of us came out into this wanting to be teachers, and I'm coming out of this knowing I'll never be a teacher. I'm just gone back to being
on day one. Yeah,
definitely. I'm definitely better recruiter than I am a teacher. No, it's really good. And again, I think that's where I really wanted to ask you that question, because I think we've all afforded the vulnerability now to say, look, it has been really challenging, and just think about how brilliant it's going to feel when they're all back in school and we can all actually do our job, even if we can't go back into the office just yet. It's just going to feel fabulous, isn't it?
And they're buzzing as well. Our two are absolutely buzzing about the fact they're going back, so I'm chuffed for them as well. So
they just can't wait. Do you remember the Julie Donaldson book, Squash and a Squeeze? It's only when you actually, although it's the reverse, obviously she has a house full of animals and then realises how big her house actually is. And I feel that they would never have appreciated school if it wasn't for this experience. Yeah, my two, believe it or not, can't wait to go back. So, well, let's hope that's the case when this gets broadcast live. Thank you so much. We'll make sure that everybody's got links for your Future of Work series. And I think we'll link to Fresh Walks as well, because I do think it's a brilliant initiative for people to get out and mingle and network, or just go and have some great walks. So thank you so much for joining me today. Really
thank you. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Lysha.
Bye.